On June 25, 1876, along the Little Bighorn River in what is now Montana, one of the most famous battles in American history began. To generations of Americans, it became known as Custer's Last Stand, a dramatic defeat of the U.S. 7th Cavalry under Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. But to the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Arapaho, and other Plains people, the battle had another name, the Battle of the Greasy Grass. That name points to a different memory of the same event, not as a doomed military legend, but as a defense of families, land, and a way of life under enormous pressure. The battle lasted only 2 days, yet it became a symbol fought over for more than a century. To understand why the battle happened, it is not enough to begin with Custer riding into the valley. The conflict grew from years of broken promises, shifting tribal boundaries, military pressure, and competition for control of the northern plains. The Little Bighorn region lay within the Crow Indian Reservation in southeastern Montana Territory, but the area had also become a place where Lakota and other Plains groups hunted, camped, and moved. Some of these movements were the result of native power politics. Others were direct consequences of U.S. expansion, which pushed tribes into new areas and intensified older rivalries. By 1876, the Plains were not a simple two-sided frontier. They were a contested landscape shaped by native nations, U.S. treaties, military strategy, settlers, scouts, and survival. The Great Sioux War of 1876 was the larger conflict that brought the 7th Cavalry to the Little Bighorn. A major cause was the Black Hills, which the Lakota consider sacred. After gold was found there, white miners and settlers poured into lands that had been protected for native use under treaty agreements. U.S. leaders tried to purchase the Black Hills, but when the Lakota refused to sell, military action followed. The government demanded that native people who were away from agencies return by a deadline in the middle of winter, an order that many bands either never received, could not obey, or refused as illegitimate. When they did not comply, the army treated them as hostile. The result was a campaign designed to force independent bands onto reservations. The native camp near the Little Bighorn was not a small raiding party. It was a large village containing Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho people, including families, elders, children, horses, lodges, and warriors. Several major leaders were associated with the village, including Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Chief Gall. Sitting Bull, whose Lakota name was Thathaenka Iotake, was not simply a battlefield commander in the European sense. He was a spiritual and political leader whose visions deeply inspired the people around him. Shortly before the battle, he had reportedly seen soldiers falling into camp, a vision many interpreted as a sign of victory. This mattered because morale, belief, and communal determination were central to how the village faced the approaching army. On the U.S. side stood the 7th Cavalry Regiment, about 700 men under George Armstrong Custer. Custer was already famous before Little Bighorn. During the American Civil War, he had risen rapidly and won a reputation for boldness, aggression, and personal bravery. But those same traits could become dangerous when mixed with incomplete information and an underestimation of the enemy. In 1876, Custer was not operating alone. The campaign involved multiple army columns meant to converge on native bands and trap them. The plan depended on coordination across long distances and rough terrain, something difficult even under ideal conditions. By the time Custer approached the Little Bighorn, he believed speed and surprise were essential. Custer's scouts had found signs of a very large village. The problem was that no one in his command fully understood just how large it was or how many warriors it could field. Custer feared the village might scatter if he waited, so he chose to attack quickly. He divided his regiment into separate battalions, sending Major Marcus Reno to strike one part of the village, Captain Frederick Benteen to scout to the left, and keeping a force with himself to move toward another position. Dividing a force was not automatically reckless. Cavalry tactics often used separate movements to strike, scout, and block escape routes. But at Little Bighorn, the decision became disastrous because the native force was far larger and more organized than Custer anticipated. Reno's attack began in the valley, but it quickly lost momentum. His men encountered fierce resistance from warriors defending the village. Instead of collapsing, the native response intensified. Reno's soldiers dismounted, fought briefly, and then retreated toward the bluffs in confusion. That retreat became costly, with men scattered, killed, or left behind. Benteen later joined Reno on the high ground, and the surviving troops formed a defensive position. They would remain under pressure, but they survived. Meanwhile, Custer and 5 companies moved separately along the ridges. The exact sequence of Custer's final movements remains debated, because no soldier with him survived to describe it. What is clear is that his detachment became isolated. For the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, the battle was not a chaotic mob overwhelming helpless soldiers. It was a rapid, adaptive defense by people who knew the terrain, understood horse warfare, and were fighting near their families. Leaders such as Crazy Horse and Gall played important roles in rallying warriors and exploiting the separation of the U.S. companies. Once Reno was checked and pushed back, more warriors could turn toward Custer's command. Native fighters used mobility, numbers, and knowledge of the ground to surround and pressure the cavalry. The U.S. soldiers, armed with single-shot carbines and burdened by confusion, found themselves facing an enemy far stronger than expected. Custer's final fight has been mythologized in paintings, films, and popular memory, often as a dramatic circle of soldiers making a heroic last stand. The reality was probably more fragmented. Archaeology and native oral history suggest the fighting unfolded across several positions, with groups of soldiers falling back, breaking apart, and being overwhelmed at different moments. Custer was killed, along with 2 of his brothers, a nephew, and a brother-in-law. 5 of the 7th Cavalry's 12 companies were wiped out. In total, U.S. casualties included 268 dead and 55 severely wounded, 6 of whom later died. Among the dead were also native scouts serving with the Army, including Crow and Arauca men, whose role reflected the complex alliances of the Plains Wars. The native victory at the Little Bighorn was overwhelming, but it did not end the war in their favor. In the immediate sense, it was a stunning defeat for the United States Army and the most significant battle of the Great Sioux War. It proved that the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho could defeat a major cavalry force when conditions favored them. But politically, the battle hardened U.S. resolve. News of Custer's defeat shocked the American public, especially because it arrived around the nation's centennial celebrations. Instead of leading to restraint, the defeat fueled demands for revenge and intensified military campaigns. Within months, U.S. pressure increased, and many Native people were forced toward surrender, reservation life, or flight. Public memory of the battle changed dramatically over time. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Custer was often portrayed as a fallen hero. His widow, Libby Custer, worked for decades to protect and promote his reputation, helping shape the image of a brave commander sacrificed on the frontier. This version fit a broader national story that celebrated expansion and minimized Native perspectives. But after Libby's death in 1933, and especially with the 1934 publication of Frederick F. Van de Water's book, Glory Hunter, The Life of General Custer, a more critical image emerged. Custer began to appear less like a flawless martyr and more like an ambitious officer whose decisions contributed to catastrophe. Today, the Battle of the Little Bighorn is remembered not as a simple tale of heroism or defeat, but as a deeply layered event in the history of the American West. It involved Native resistance to U.S. expansion, intertribal tensions, treaty violations, military miscalculation, and competing memories of the same ground. The Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument now honors those who fought on both sides, reflecting a broader effort to recognize that history looks different depending on who is telling it. For the United States Army, it was a devastating defeat. For the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho, it was a powerful victory at the Greasy Grass. And for history, it remains a reminder that legends often hide the most important truths. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.